Sir Kannan Gopalakrishnan. He was working as a senior architect at Engineering Design Research Centre, L&T Construction, India's largest construction company. He's also worked on projects ranging from institutional buildings to international airports, apartment complexes to aircraft hangars. He's also attended 3 international conferences and 2 national conferences, and has also presented technical papers at the Jawaharlal Nehru University, Delhi, and the MSRIT, Bangalore. He's also won the national championship at Archaman at the India's largest architecture quiz. Sir Kannan Gopalakrishnan currently runs a design firm, Habitat Design Studio, and he is also a visiting faculty at the renowned architecture schools in Tamil Nadu.
Welcome back to UGC lecture series. This is AR 6502, History of Architecture and Culture 5. We are reviewing industrialization in Unit 2. This is lecture number 16. If you remember the previous episode, we saw the works of famous architect Henry van der Velde and Hector Guimard. And in this episode, we will be looking at another prodigious architect, Antonio Gaudi. Antonio Gaudi was a Catalan architect whose distinctive style is characterized by freedom of form, voluptuous color, texture, and organic unity. Gaudi entirely worked in Barcelona city or nearby his, because most of his career was occupied by the construction of Sagrada Familia, which was still unfinished during his death in 1926. He was born in Catalonia on the Mediterranean coast of Spain to a modest family. He was the son of a coppersmith, but he showed early interest in architecture. In 1869-70, he went to study in Barcelona. Barcelona was a then political and intellectual center of Catalonia and one of the Spain's most modern city at that particular point of time. He finished his school there in architecture, and the director of his school is noted to have acclaimed when he was giving his degree, "I still don't know whether we are giving a degree to a genius or a lunatic." Such was his architecture. His quest for a new architectural language went towards exploring different kinds of geometric forms. So the result was the nave of the Sagrada Familia church was a hyperboloid vault. His inspiration from nature is taken from a tree, as the column looks like a trunk. Its branches symbolize the trees rising up to the roof. His study of nature translated to his use of ruled geometrical forms such as the hyperbolic paraboloid and helicoid of the cone, and it also reflects in the forms of Gaudi which he found in nature. Gaudi used generatrix, which is like the ruled surfaces which form generated by straight lines, and he found a lot of examples of such in reeds and bones and in other plants. For him, there is no better structure than the trunk of a tree or a human skeleton. He found all his inspirations from there. These forms are at the same time functional, at the same time aesthetic. Gaudi discovered how to adapt the language of nature to the language of structural forms in architecture. He used to equate the helicoid form to movement, the hyperboloid to light. Paraboloids, hyperboloids, helicoids, conoids constantly varying the incidence of light. They make necessary ornamentation and even modeling unnecessary. His architectural approach tends to begin with organic biomorphic forms, which often had no previous examples ever, which spiral out into artistic collage of thoughts, feelings, moods, and what he was thinking at that particular point of time. He uses soft fluidic formation rather than harsh solid lines. If you see his example Casa Mila, his exterior mimics the flowing of waves of the sea. The terraced roof of the building offers a truly characteristic vista into the street, which you can even call it Gaudiesque style because of his very characteristic way of building things. His irregular chimneys standing tall like soldiers with multicolored tiles. Casa Mila is 1323 square meter per floor on a plot of about 1620 square meters. Gauri began the first sketches in his workshop in the Sagrada Familia itself, where he conceived of this house as a constant curve both outside and inside. He incorporated multiple solutions of formal geometry and elements of a naturalistic ideal. He tried to incorporate the naturalistic ideal and formal geometry of elements. He fused them both, and that is when his forms developed. Casa Mila is a result of two buildings structured around two courtyards to provide light to the 9 levels which he has designed, plus the basement and the ground floor. The mezzanine, which is the noble floor, the basement of Casa Mila was intended to be the garage, the main floor, the residence of the Milas, which is a flat for the all of 1323 square meters, the entire floor. On the rest of the floors, he distributed about 20 homes in the rest of the floors. The end product looked shaped like an asymmetrical 8 shape building because of the different shape and size of the two courtyards which he has placed. The attic housed the laundry, drying areas and other services, forming an insulating space for the buildings and determining the levels of the roof itself, because the top floors might be little too hot during the summers. So, he put the laundry and other services in the top floor, and since he did not require a lot of floor space for that, he could even shape the roof levels on that particular floor pretty easily. You can see them clearly over here. One of the most significant portions of this building is the roof itself. It has skylights, staircases, exits, fans and chimneys. They all have specific architectural functions, but they have become real sculptures which he has integrated into the building. The building itself is a unique identity. The shape of the exterior continues to the shape of the interior. The apartment features ceiling with plaster reliefs of great dynamism, and because plaster ceilings make him do different shapes, and handcrafted wooden doors, handcrafted windows, furniture, everything, but sadly the handcrafted furniture not present right now. Plastered interiors, the external chimneys, the stairways which were intended for services in access to housing was by elevator, except for the noble floor where Gaudi ordered a special staircase. Noble floor is the first mezzanine floor from the ground floor. Gaudi did a very interesting thing in his apartment building. Even back in that age, he wanted the people who lived in the flats to know each other, to talk to each other. Therefore, there were only lifts on every second floor, so that people had to communicate with one another on different floors. So, which means for catching a lift, one has to go to the other floor. So, they eventually will talk. There are a lot of incidental talking happening because of the simple architectural decisions. If you view the building from the outside, there are clearly 3 parts. The main body of the 6-story blocks with winding stone floors, a block back with a change of pace with waves similar to that of the waves of the sea, with the texture more smooth and white with marble holes seem like gunboats. Finally, the body of the roof, wave that he was talking about earlier, the roof, finials. Slowly the original facade of Gaudi were being replaced. In 1928, there was this tailor, Mosea, opened the first store in La Pedrera. He reworked and eliminated all the cast iron bars, because at the middle of the 20th century, twisted ironwork got very little importance and nobody really cared about removing all the ironworks. Nobody cared about defaming the work of a grand work of architecture. Most of the ironwork was lost. A few years later, when Americans donated one of them to Museum of Modern Art, where it is on display right now. Except for that, most of the ironwork is lost. This is the elevation of the building showing the different facade. This is the plan of Casa Mila. Look at how the exterior has simply transformed to get the interior. The interior is no different from the exterior. Each room is clearly designed as an organic shape with the exterior flowing into the interior. You can see the 8-shaped building with 2 irregular shaped courtyards. There is another feature in this building. The building has an original solution in solving the lobby part. Usually the lobbies of apartment complexes are closed and dark, but in this complex it is open and airy because the courtyards make a very important role here. It also not only creates light and air movement, it also creates a place of transit which is clearly visible to the user who is accessing the building from across. So, there is a visual quality which is generated out of these courtyards. The cut isometric section of the Casa Milla and another section. In the courtyard, elliptical beams and girders adopt a very constructive solution, traditional but cylindrical, but Gaudi incorporated a very ingenious solution. He used 2 concentric cylindrical beams, stretched radial beams like the spokes of a bicycle. They form a point outside the beam, making the functions of a central girder and keystone works in tension and compression simultaneously. We look at another interesting building, the Sagrada Familia, which the architect devoted almost his entire life to. The construction began in 1882. It is probably the best known structure for Catalan modernism, because if you remember Art Nouveau earlier, it is called modernism in Spain. It draws over 3 million visitors every year, but the project is still under construction. It is expected to be completed by 2026 because the constructions are still going on according to the designs which Gaudi had planned even before his death. Even though this building is not completed, it is still a UNESCO World Heritage Site. Gaudi was appointed the architect of this building in 1883 at the age of 31, following a lot of disagreements between the temple's promoters and the original architect Francisco de Lozano. But what Gaudi did was he maintained the Lozano's Latin cross plan, which was typical of Gothic cathedrals of that day. But then what he did was he departed from the Gothic cathedral in a lot of ways, several ways. Most notably, what he did was he developed a system of angled columns. He did not have straight columns, he had angled columns and had hyperboloid vaults, which geniusly eliminated the need of flying buttresses on the exterior. This is Sagrada Familia. You can still see the angled columns, hyperboloid arches, which eliminated the requirement of flying buttresses. Sagrada Familia uses 3D forms of ruled surfaces. He used hyperboloids, paraboloids, helicoids and conoids and all the regular things that Gaudi usually uses. He, rather than relying on exterior elements, horizontal roads are transferred through columns on the interior itself. Usually churches of that day had exterior elements like buttresses and flying buttresses to transfer the horizontal or lateral roads, but instead Gaudi used the interior columns itself to transfer the lateral loads. The complex shapes allow for thinner, finer structure, which gave another important quality to the building, because if the structure became thinner and finer, you had a possibility of having more amount of light into the building. Gaudi used plaster models which he made to design, to develop his building and to even view what he has designed, including a 1:10 scale model of the main nave. The model itself measured 5 meters in height and 2 meters by, the model itself measured 5 meters in height and width and 2 meters in depth. He also devised a system of strings and weights suspended from the plan of the temple on the ceiling. From this inverted model, he derived the necessary angles of the columns. Here is a section of the building. Gaudi embedded religious symbolism in each aspect of Sagrada Familia. He created a visual representation of most of the Christian beliefs in the form of sculpture and art. The sculpting of the Nativity facade is a smooth, intricate cobbling which Gaudi oversaw himself. There are 3 facades for the entire basilica: the Glory facade, the Nativity facade and the Passion facade, facing south, east and west respectively. The Glory facade is the south, Nativity is east and Passion is the west facade. West is the main entrance to the building, so Passion is the west facade East is where the god is. So, in east he made the nativity facade, and south is another side of the church. So, the glory facade on the side. He had the famous sculptor Joseph Maria Subiac, whose angular sculptures extend the modernist character to the temple. You can see some of the angular sculptures which he had designed. The central nave soars to a height of 45 meters. It is designed to resemble a forest of lot of piers. See, there are a lot of piers which resemble line of trees, and they keep branching out like this. So, this will look like a forest made of multicolor, multi-hue, made stucco work of different stones. The piers change in cross section from base to terminus, increasing in number of vertices, because if you take a section here, the number of vertices is less, but if you take a section here, number of vertices that you see on the top is more. The slender bifurcating columns draws the eyes upward, with the light filters through circular apertures through the walls. The openings are finished in Venetian glass, and the tiles are green and gold, which articulates clearly the line of the hyperbolites. After completion, Sagrada Familia will have 18 towers composed to a present unique view of the temple from any single vantage point. That was the idea of Antonio Gaudi. It will have 4 bell towers representing the apostles, who will be crowning each facade, reaching approximately 100 meters in height. At the northern end, there would be a tower representing the Virgin Mary standing over the apse. The central tower will reach 72 meters in height to symbolize Christ, surrounded by 4 towers who will be representing the evangelists. The subsequent generations of craftsmen and architects after Gaudi's death relied mainly on the remaining drawings and plaster models which Gaudi had made to advance the project, because they wanted to adhere to Gaudi's vision as closely as possible. That is why, if you see here, this was the original facade which was designed by Gaudi. This was the addition made by later architects and engineers. Clearly, you can see that they didn't want to do the same thing, because they wanted to know which was original work and which was later addition. So, they used a different kind of material to distinguish that. As a result, the temple design itself is a collaboration that spans over a century. Gaudi himself, to be truly honest, viewed the project as a collaborative work of generations, because he had written that I will grow old, but others will come after me. What must be conserved is the spirit of the work, but its life has to depend on the generation it is handed down to, and with whom it lives and is incarnated. He expected people to take on the lead from where he left off, to pass on the work that he is supposed to complete. He himself envisioned that the project will be a collaborative work of many generations. Who would have expected the church, which was started by an architect before him in 1882, came to his hand in 1883, a year later, and he took it till 1926. And from there were generations of architects who had worked on Sagrada Familia, and it will be completed only by 2026, nearly 150 years of making a modern church. These are some of the drawings which Gaudi had made. These are the towers which he had designed. If you take a cross section, if you look at the plan of each of these areas, the plan here looks like this. If you take a plan here, it looks like this. The plan here looks like this, plan here like this, and on top it looks like this. Look at the amount of time and amount of effort that the architect has made to create such a complex 3-dimensional work of art, where he is able to do different types of plans in the same structure at different levels. Here you can clearly see what Gaudi had built here, and the rest of the things in lines as what will be built by 2026, what Gaudi had planned for this building. Here you can see a structural model of the central nave, showing all the forested piers and columns, which you could see clearly here. The next project is Park Güell. which is a very interesting public park project. Here, his client Güell wanted Gaudi to design a park which is meant for aristocrats and the bureaucrats of his time. So, what he did was Güell thought he would build a apartment complex which overlooks the park, and he can use this apartment and park as a good money spinner. So, the park was designed by Gaudi, and the apartment complex was supposed to be designed later, but only 2 houses were eventually built, and one of them even Gaudi inhabited that building. It was designed by another architect, not by Gaudi. It was designed by some other person, but the park was designed by Gaudi. The park is characterized by the entrance, which is flanked by 2 Gaudi buildings with its 2 towers. It has unique elements, the use of mosaic, complex curves, his usual angular columns taking the load, vertical and lateral load together at the same time. Look at the vibrant colors and textures that Gaudi had explored in this building. The visitors to this park are generally amazed at the extent of work that Gaudi had done in his lifetime. Here is an entrance plaque that says Park Güell. This is an artist impression of how Park Güell would look like, with its entrance flanked by 2 buildings designed by Gaudi. Let us take a look at what we learnt in this episode. We tried to understand the life and works of the famed architect Antonio Gaudi. We understood his contribution towards the Art Nouveau style, which is modernism in Spain. We understood his famous works such as Casa Mila, Sagrada Familia, Park Güell, etc. With this, we should be able to answer the following questions. Explain the architectural character of Gaudi's buildings with sketches. Explain the Sagrada Familia and its symbolism with its sketches. How did Gaudi revolutionize the apartment complex in Casa Mila? We've come to the end of this lecture, and I'll meet you soon in next lecture. Thank you.